Nice.
Got a haircut like me.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I've got a busy day, but I'm not busy this shit, right?
It's very special. We'll do it quick.
Yeah. It's all right, don't worry. I've always got 1 hour in my timetable.
Yeah, let's put this on top.
I'll be well.
Parshah, lots to be grateful for. Parshah. I'll keep this on top.
You drinking coffee?
I'm gonna have a coffee actually. Could use one. Let's see. We're almost there.
I've got a question for you. Not a halachic question, just a curiosity.
Go on.
You know your Wednesday presentations.
Yeah.
Are they sent via Brooklyn to you?
The content is.
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell you why. I mean, the content is excellent. It's just that producing a presentation for Zoom or even for lecture, for Zoom especially. I do one every week, twice a week for by only half an hour.
right.
And I have a guy who looks over it from the
Before it goes on.
no, well, not the technical content. Well, technical content, how it's visual stuff, but it takes some time. And
Yes.
I mean, like I say, we watching some on TV, and I was before I watch the program, and then I'll sit down, chill out for 9 hours, and then go back a bit later on. And this is a work job, so I don't get to try and do it in the daytime. It would probably take me up to 16 hours to
16 hours.
to write it from scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got all the PDFs and all the different, so I've got to paste it and then I write it in a way that it suits this lecture.
Right.
But I guess with your team, it comes from.
So there's one team preparing,
Yeah.
and then everyone is doing.
It's high quality. Listen, I mean, I can, but it would take me a lot longer to prepare. Do it at quality. And the problem we have is I used to embed videos into them like you've got.
Right.
But we record them, and for some reason the bandwidth is not very good. So what's happening is my boss has just said he just bought buying in a very, very high speed system. It's costing about $2,000, but the company's making a fortune. He wastes a lot of money, but hey, the more he pays me, the more I mean,
Amen. Amen.
I can give more to charity and more to the kids.
Yeah, and you can be a bit less worried.
There's no worries anymore. I don't have the worries. I'm not in a position where some people are. But listen, the amount I give, if I was able to millionaire, percentage.
And that percentage, oh, there we go.
I'll be able to donate to give to have a new building.
Oh, no, it's a good investment.
What?
It's a good investment for Hashem to give you more.
Absolutely.
Amen to that.
I believe so.
Amazing.
So yours are you'll send it over to you, and then you just select the slides.
Yeah, and add and subtract.
Yeah.
To make it UK.
Yes.
Tweet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm continually looking at my watch throughout the presentation. There's another person who's doing another one in management. Lovely lady, she comes in. But I told her, I says, keep it simple, stupid. And she did a presentation which I watched last week. I had it on the background while I was doing some more work. And it's an area that I had quite a lot of experience working in, and I've also presented it. And I went, oh my word.
Deep end.
No, it's as a colleague said, just have a look at the work.
Oh God. I get the drift.
I mean, you know, well, but you gotta hit the point, you gotta hit the phone, and you gotta at the end of it, you recount, at the beginning, like these are what we're gonna do, blah blah blah, and at the end, so right, we've done this, we've done that, so I mean, it's not too bad for the presentation you're giving, because we don't have to sit an exam or write assignments. It's people getting an idea about it,
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, on Wednesday evening, which is unusual, I had the laptop open with you giving it,
yeah,
and I had a second computer on.
Oh wow!
I had a book over here, of today's thing. So I was typing away, doing some work for work,
Right.
and listening to you, and then dipping out on the presentation. You said, "Right, go to chapter so and so. Look at page that." So I dipped into. I mean, I could hear it.
In the background, what's going on?
You know, I didn't want to miss it, but I had other things.
Amazing.
I've got in about 3 weeks. I'm going to be at the NEC.
Very good. You're presenting that.
No, I'm exhibiting with my company I'm working for. So I looked at my watch and I'm going to be getting home. What time I leave at 6 o'clock? I'm not sure. I wasn't sure if I'm on the train, but I can just listen to you with headphones on.
Interesting, yeah. So one of the people, I think 2 of the people came in on a called in rather than they didn't see the presentation.
Yeah.
They called in. They have the book, so it helps. Let's do a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akon niyam midbarim.
I mean, the only thing which is my own criticism is that with these sort of lectures, I've noticed, and I pick this up very, very quickly. There's 1 or 2 people who like to hear themselves speak, and I know they mean well, but unfortunately for.
If you don't have that, you worry. There's always going to be a few people.
Yeah, well, I have a lecture which I do for half an hour every week. I'm doing 2 a week, which is on a Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday at 2 o'clock to 3. And these are to complement the notes we've got. So I give them the hints and tips how to complete the assignment. And very, very rarely, and we say, right, if you've got any questions and answers, any questions, leave it to the end, because we're recording it. Now, this girl who's doing it, but her session, she kept asking questions throughout it, which at the end of the day, this was going to be uploaded onto our platform called Moodle.
Right.
Students don't want to hear, all they want to hear is the contents. And then what we do right to the end is I say the session's edit is finished. My colleague, he will then
cut the recording.
Cut it, and then after that, if people want to ask questions about this, that, the other,
that doesn't have to be uploaded, or whoever listens to it knows that it's over.
Yeah. But this is the future. I mean, I remember.
Good morning, Malcolm.
Morning.
We hear you loud and clear.
That's good.
But, how are you keeping?
Not bad, not complaining, but it sat wet this morning. I thought I'd stay here.
Very good. The 2 of you online. Hatzlacha. But we're gonna talk about the parasha in a moment. We're gonna talk about Parasha in a moment. We're just catching up. Yeah. We were just catching up. Let's get started. Let's get started with what's going on this week in the calendar, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the parasha. Parshah is exciting also because it's this stream of parshas, the whole book of Bereshis. Every parsha is another story, another part of the puzzle. Let's talk about what's going on this week at this time of the year. We have this past Shabbos was the 17th of Cheshvan, which was yesterday. It's the day the flood began. Okay, not necessarily a day to celebrate, but written in the Chumash, it was the 17th day of the second month, and that's according to many counts the month of Cheshvan. And then we have also this coming Shabbos, the Shabbos Mevarchim. It's the blessing of the new month, and it's not just any month, it's the month of Kislev, it's a month of Chanukah, as well as many Hasidic highlights, many Hasidic days took place in the month of Kislev, so much so that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, who founded the whole idea of Chabad, his big celebration day is on this month as well, the 19th, so there's a lot of big dates coming up. Hanukkah is not yet, it's just over a month, but the beginning of the month on which it's the end of November. Hanukkah begins in November this year. Remember and remind everyone you know, so they're not waiting for 25th of December or anything like that.
So when's actually Hanukkah days?
28th. Sunday 28th is the first, Sunday evening will be the first light of candles.
Historically, it sometimes comes at the time
of December.
It's Xmas time, yeah.
You got a whole month ahead. L'chaim. Although this is an elite year, so it explains, come Purim, we'll have pushed it back a month, and that way we're back on track. But for now, Hanukkah, we've got to remind everybody it's a month early.
Well, I've got my Hanukkah candles already.
Oh, talk about being organized.
So is Rosh
they were given to me.
Rosh Chodesh will be next week.
Are you doing, I want to ask you about it before.
Okay, we'll get one thing at one time, Jeff, one thing at one time. Then we have also, it happens to be that tomorrow night, the founder of the Chabad Yeshiva system was the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name was Shalom Dov Ber. Yeah. And personally, this year we've had a Shalom, our baby is called Shalom Dov Ber, named after the Rebbe Rashab. the Reb Shalom Dov Ber, and his birthday is this week. It's actually tomorrow night, and it was a big day. One of the special stories about him, he was obviously, even from a young child, a young boy, he already showed tremendous signs of leadership, but also of sincerity. And one of the beautiful stories is that when he was a young boy, his older brother, the Razah, and him were playing. Well, if they grow up in a house of Rebbes and they watch people come and visit their father and ask for advice and ask for blessings, so what sort of games do kids play? They role play. And they're role playing Chassid and Rebbe. So the older brother says, oh, well, I'm older, I'm the Rebbe. Okay, you be the Rebbe, I'll be the Chassid. So I come and ask you for a question. So he comes to his older brother, he says, Rebbe, you're in the game, you're the Rebbe, I want to ask you a question. I have a major concern. What's my problem? This is a young little boy, I don't know how old, 5, 6, 7, young little boy. He says, on Shabbos, you know, you're not allowed to select. So if there's good stuff and bad stuff, you can't take away the bad to leave over the good, because it's called selecting on the Shabbos. That's not allowed. It's one of the malachas. Okay, well, I didn't know, and it says in the Shulchan Aruch that it's best not to eat nuts, that you have to crack open on Shabbos, because when you crack open nuts, think of peanuts, yes? You open the nuts, and then the shells are around them, the nuts are around, you end up automatically almost removing the shells in order to get to the nuts. So as a safety precaution, it's best not to be eating those sort of nuts, so you don't come to what's so commonly done, removing and selecting the shells. He says, look, I didn't know, I didn't select, but I was eating nuts, even though it says in the Shulchan Aruch that it's best not to. Okay, so it doesn't say it's forbidden, but this little kid's concerned that he ate the nuts, that it says best. So he says, you must be the Rebbe, so you tell me what to do. So the brother says to him, oh, it's a good question. He says to him, I'll tell you the answer. You should do this, that, and the other, and this will give you a teshuvah. And the younger boy, this is the Rebbe Shab, whose birthday is this week, and he says, brother, you're not a Rebbe. You don't know how to play the game. He says, what do you mean? I gave you good advice. He says, no. You didn't sigh before you advised me. You weren't concerned. You're throwing out advice. That's not a Rebbe. A Rebbe feels, empathizes with what the person's going through. Nah, you're not going to make a good Rebbe. And this is a young little boy. Later on, he became a Rebbe himself. And of course, he didn't give much advice. And he lived through difficult times. But also, he founded a powerhouse of where young boys were being educated in the yeshiva system, even though they weren't maybe necessarily the greatest rabbis, but already from the beginning, they should have what it takes to feel the connection and to experience it in a way that talks to them, which was the Talmid Chachamim yeshiva system, and still around today. So that's a little bit about what's going on this week, this time of the year. Let's talk about what's going on in the Parshah Chayei Sarah. Parshah Chayei Sarah follows on from last week's Parshah. At the end of last week's Parshah, we read that Avraham and Sarah were blessed with a son called Yitzchak. Yitzchak is right now already 37 years old. We figured that out because his mother, Sarah, in this week's Parshah, as the Parshah opens up, passes away right after the Akedah.
Sorry, yeah.
Malcolm, did you say something?
Yeah, I've just got it in front of me now.
Oh, I got you in front of me also. We're doing well.
No.
So we have the life of Sarah, Sarah passes away this week's Parshah right after the Akedah. And of course, it was a big deal when Sarah passed away. She was Avraham's not only wife, but also support in everything. She was, in a lot of ways, a big part of the masterminding of the whole plan, bringing Hashem's name out into the open again, making the ideas available, teaching the masses. So much so we learned in the previous chapter that Avraham would be busy teaching men, and Sarah at the same time would be teaching women, and women needed to be involved as much as the men, otherwise the families wouldn't connect. And this was Sarah Imenu. So when she passed away in this week's Sedra, it opens up right after last week with the Akedah. Avraham Avinu has to find her a place to bury her. And for some reason, the Parshah makes a big deal out of the burial plot, which is why in Eretz Yisrael and Israel this week, many Jewish people are going to try and spend Shabbos in Hebron. Why in Hebron? In Hebron is where the cave of Machpelah is. It's not always easy to find a place and to be there safely, but they call it Shabbat Hebron, because in this week's Parshah we read that although the whole land of Israel belongs to us, but it's actually recorded that there was a sale and a transaction, and Avraham Avinu paid top dollar to acquire this plot of land, and therefore it's owned by us, not only because Eretz Yisrael belongs to us, because actually we have a historical record of the sale that took place. There are a few places like that, 3 places, and each one of them becomes a place of contention. where you have major concerns about it. One of them being the Har HaBayis, Temple Mount, where we have recorded in the Torah, David HaMelech buys it, and yet this is one of the most big flare points in Israel, where they claim that Israel shouldn't be there. The same thing in Hebron, where the security there has consistently been on the lookout and constantly looking around to make sure to keep it safe, because there are threats to this place, to the cave of Machpelah. But until today, you can still go there, and we can go to the place where Avraham Avinu in this week's Sedra buys from Ephron the Hittite. He buys it off him for 400 expensive coins in order so that his wife could be buried there, Sarah, so that he could bring closer to Sarah's life the cave of Machpelah in this week's Sedra. The Parshah continues that afterwards, Avraham Avinu realizes that he was this close to offering up his son on the altar, and he wouldn't have had any continuation. His son would never marry, he had no children. And therefore he decides he has to find a wife for his son. And he does what is we call the first Shidduch in this Torah. Now, oftentimes, Eliezer, who's Avram's right-hand man, and in this week's Parshah, it's recorded how he travels miles and miles away to Avraham Avinu's family. Remember, Avram traveled when Hashem said to him, go, lech lecha me'aretzecha, go. Eliezer goes that whole journey all the way back eastwards, deeper in the Middle East. And there he goes to find the wife for his master's son, for Yitzchak, from the family of Avraham Avinu. Now, Eliezer had his own daughter, who he offered in marriage to Avraham, and Avraham says, no, I want to have specifically from my own family, because I want to have a family that will be able to keep up the traditions that Yitzchak is spearheading, is taking on from after us, because it has to come from a very unique family line where Avraham and Sarah came from, and Yitzchak and his wife would come from as well. Amazingly, Eliezer travels all the way and offers. He meets Rivka at the well. She gives her the gifts, goes home, and has a conversation, trying to convince the family to let her go home. Eventually, Rivka's saying yes, even though her family's saying, oh, maybe not. Delay a little bit, and she's like, no, I'm out of here. I don't want to hang around this place. I want to go, and I want to travel away to a place where Avraham Avinu, who is righteous, and go to him, spend time with them, rather than be around here. What's fascinating is that often this storyline is the assumption people make for a shidduch. What's a shadchan? Someone who travels somewhere, tells the girl, okay, I found the right guy for you, tells the guy, I found the right girl for you, and without meeting, they're already engaged, they're getting married. And it happens to be that's not what a shadchan is. He went to London. He didn't send a messenger to London to meet the girl. No, he went to London. Who told him to go to London? Who suggested the shidduch? A shadchan. So often people mistake this idea that the shadchan's job is to make the match, as in to seal the match, to make the decision. And of course, in this week's parsha, it seems like that's actually what Eliezer did. But of course, the shadchan doesn't do that. The shadchan makes the introduction. And although in Jewish values, it's very important to have a shadchan, a middle person who makes the match, who suggests it and introduces him to her and her to him. And therefore, also, if there's any sort of concerns, there is somebody you can go to without having to offend anybody. It's much more dignified. But the matchmaker doesn't make the match, doesn't seal the match. The match is by the consent of after the meeting. Introduction. However, in this week's Sedra, it's not what it was. In this week's Sedra, Eliezer was much more than a shadchan. In this week's Sedra, sorry?
How difficult it was to travel in those days. No, you're traveling through the desert with no roads. It makes one think, how did they navigate from one place to the other?
No, what's the good answer?
These are some of the stars.
The stars. So whoever was leading the caravan had to know how to read the stars. It didn't help to be able to read your smartphone and your GPS, because that didn't work in those days. And it didn't help even to have an AA map wouldn't have helped, because there's no roads in the desert. But the stars. It's
easier to travel at night because you can navigate easier by the stars. But if you're just doing it by the sun, remember the sun's moving all the time.
Yeah. Well, you realign yourself, I think. You get the general gist, and then in the nighttime you realign yourself to where you have to go the next day.
They would have bumped into travelers all the way along the route.
Possibly, yeah.
So is that the way to where?
I mean, you know roads.
And you got to make sure you take with enough water, you take with enough food, because there's no petrol stations along the way, unless you be at bump into Avraham Avinu, where he was pitched up with his tent. But yeah, it's fascinating. Just this past Friday night, we had guests. We were talking to guests, and they were discussing where they went for a 12-day drive through the outback in Australia, and they would stop along the way. How did they refuel? 12 days, food and everything. And basically, they were saying how the petrol stations along the way are little like villages, and the families that live around it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you miss one of those petrol stations, you're pretty stranded until you find to flag someone down. It's not for me, but not for the faint hearted. But back to the story of Eliezer comes to all this way, and he is actually an agent rather than a shadchan. And there are halachic differences between a shadchan and an agent. A shliach, Eliezer actually gives Rivka the equivalent of the ring, already back, the engagement ring, already back before she's even met Yitzchak. But he travels all the way back, and Yitzchak sees her, they get married, and the parasha continues right towards the end, where Yitzchak finally marries Rivka, after the long-winded story, and he finally feels comforted for the loss of his mother. When he gets to know his wife, and they live together, and as Rashi points out, the fascinating miracles that took place in Sarah Imeinu's tent stopped after she passed away, and they came back once Rivka started living there, which is why Yitzchak finally felt comforted. What were the miracles? 3 big miracles, and amazingly, each one of them carry significance into the mitzvahs that Jewish women have today. Mitzvah number 1, or miracle number 1, I should say, there was a cloud of glory always present over Sarah's tent. And when she passed away, that cloud went away. And when Rivka came to live with Yitzchak in her tent, there was once again a presence of holiness. And that presence, obviously, is the importance of making sure that marriage isn't just technical, emotional, and physical, but also to add into the ingredients, the very important one, the spiritual element within a Yiddish marriage. And of course, that has to do with going to mikveh and being conscious of the hamitzvahs of marriage. Now, the other 2 miracles also connect to Jewish women. The candles that Sarah lit, she would light them on Friday, and they would burn an entire week miraculously. It doesn't make sense on any scale to have candles burn an entire week. Sarah's did, and she would light them again the next Friday. Of course, we didn't have the mitzvah of Shabbos yet, but the matriarchs and the patriarch kept the Torah, and Sarah would light her candles once a week. Of course, once Sarah passed away, the miracle stopped, and therefore you lit candles every time you needed a candle. When Rivka came back into the tent, those candles were lit once again at the beginning of the week, and they would continue. And Yitzchak's like, wow, this is just like my mother, and he found comfort in that. The third mitzvah, or the third miracle, was the miracle of her bread. Her bread remained fresh for an entire week. Nowadays, with preservatives, it's not unheard of, but in that kind of day where they ate healthy food and they didn't eat chemicals, so to have bread remain fresh for an entire week was a big deal, especially in the heat. But here you had a miracle where Sarah's bread would be left from Shabbos till Shabbos, and Rivka's had the same mitzvah, had the same miracle, and that ties into the other mitzvah, which is often associated with the Jewish women, which is taking challah from the dough. When a woman makes challah, the truth is anyone makes a dough, and you have a fresh dough, you remove a section in the beginning and you donate that to Hashem. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, it would actually be eaten by the Kohanim. Nowadays, we burn it, and that is the mitzvah of challah. And again, that was a third miracle that connected to the mitzvahs that women are much associated with. So here we have Yitzchak marrying and finding comfort for his loss, for the void, for the missingness of his mother, in the fact that he had somebody else, a significant family member, his wife, and that wife is Rivka. Amazingly. The Parshah doesn't finish yet. At the end of the Parshah, we have that after Yitzchak is now married, and Avraham is finally not shipped out, but not sent away, but married off his son Yitzchak, Avraham himself remarries. Who does he remarry? So the Parshah says he marries a woman called Keturah. And Rashi immediately tells us that actually Keturah is a code name for Hagar. Hagar was married to Avraham already until he sent her away. Hagar was once upon a time the maidservant in Avraham's house, and Sarah had asked him to take her as a wife in the hope that in that marriage she would also have children. Avraham had taken Hagar, and after Hagar had had Yishmael later on, so when the time Yitzchak came around, Sarah had instructed Avraham to send Hagar away together with her son Yishmael, and Hashem had weighed in because Avraham was hesitant, And Hashem had told Avraham, listen to your wife Sarah. She's right. And Avraham sent away Hagar. In this week's Parshah, the end of the Parshah, when he takes back a wife called Keturah, says Rashi, that's Hagar. Now that Sarah passed on, he takes Hagar back as a wife, and he continues to have 6 more children. 6 more children. So although Avraham has Yishmael and Yitzchak, we know about those two, the end of the Parshah tells us he has 6 more sons, but those sons and Yishmael, he eventually, towards the end of his life, sends them away with a tremendous amount of gifts. He gives them a lot of presents, but he remains, and the Parashah says, he tells them all that his main heir, his continuation will be by the son of Sarah, which is Yitzchak. So, all in all, Avraham has 8 sons. Only one of them, Yitzchak, he says, will be the continuation of his vision of what he had started. And that's the end of the Parashah. Go ahead.
That's interesting because our community is probably smaller than the Ishmael community.
Oh, yes.
Because the Ishmael community, as we know today, is part of the Islamic community.
You might say it's a billion people.
I've actually had discussions years ago with some good friends of mine from the Muslim community, and we discussed halachas. And it's surprising how the similarities in
oh yes, a lot of similarities in the halachas, in the laws, and how we conduct this up, but also in a lot of the values. Not all, unfortunately, not all, but in a lot of the values they overlap. They're very similar. And yes,
it's a shame we just can't have. If the two communities could, in general, not just could get on. Imagine we'd be such a powerful nation with people.
We human beings would be much more powerful if we could get along. Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes people say that the fact that we're human is our blessing, but the fact that we're human is also our challenge. Yeah, but that's part of that's what we're living for. Life isn't just fun and games. Life is training. And we train all that in the whole entire life, working on becoming better people. And we try and tell the next generation, oh, I've tried this, learn from my experience. But who does? Who does? 1 second. The topic of today is exactly this. Is it about the numbers, getting everyone involved? Or is sometimes it's worth it to lose some of the crowd? And I say lose not just to talk above the head, but they might not agree. People will check out because this is not for me. But in that, at least I'm not diluting or giving up on the values that I'm trying to teach or live by. And it's an interesting balance. You know, fascinatingly, anyone who's tried to set up a company, anyone who's led a fellowship, even if you're starting a shul, at the beginning, it starts off with a small core of people, and you might have a great idea, or you have a fantastic innovation, and people buy into it. But at a certain point, when you want to grow that small core and you want to make it bigger, it's a very fine balance between being more accessible, which means more inclusive, but less exclusive, or in other words, less unique, less specific, or being more specific, staying unique, and not being all that inclusive, and therefore not growing as fast. And often, a lot of companies, a lot of leaders, a lot of politicians find that they make a little bit of an error. They go too far one way and they try and retrace the steps because they find that they're giving up on what they stood for, or that they find that they're being too firm in what they stood for and losing the crowd. And being able to walk that balance isn't always easy, but there is value to not being only about quantity and retaining quality. Quality is not always a nothing. Oftentimes, the big numbers is not where it's at. And we're going to learn actually in Yiddishkeit, we make a great emphasis that the quantity will often follow the quality. The quantity, the growth in numbers might be a longer route if we hold on tight to what's important, but eventually it'll come round. Beautiful story in the Talmud. I think it was Rabbi Yochanan who was looking for the path to get from where he was traveling up to Yerushalayim. And as he comes to the crossroad, spoke about finding the way, you don't have a map or GPS, comes to a crossroad and he's looking for the path to Jerusalem. There's a young child sitting down on the fork and he says, son, you must know what's the best way to Jerusalem from here. And the young boy says to him, actually reckons this is one of the only times that a child outsmarted him. The young boy says to him, well, if you want to go the short, long way, go this way. But if you want to go the long, short way, go the other way. And he thinks, there's a short way, long way. I'll go the short way. He starts going the short way. And sure enough, in a very short space of time, he's almost at Yerushalayim. But the last section of that journey was so overgrown, and there was rock, you couldn't pass by. He couldn't get there. It was right in front of him, but it was too far because it was no path. So he comes back and he says to the boy, why did you send me this way? You told me it's a short way to Yerushalayim, and obviously you can't even get there. So the boy says, yeah, I told him it's a short, long way. It's short, but it's very long. Go the other way, it's much longer, but it's a shorter way because it's a sure way to be able to get there. And that's the sort of idea. Sometimes we have an important message we want to convey, and the short, long way seems much more enticing because if we drop a little bit this and a little bit that and a little bit the other, we'll be much more acceptable, inclusive, less specific, less true to what we are, but we'll be much more inclusive. But it's the short and longer way. The longer or short way sometimes means that we have to stick to what's valuable and moral, even if it means that some people will have a harder time accepting it, but it will build. It will build in a longer space of time, but it'll be much shorter and much surer. So that's what we want to focus on. And what's amazing is that in this week's Parshah, we learn that we need to have obviously a balance, so we need both, but we must have the QC, the quality control. We must have that added ingredient. And what's amazing about us is we're going to find that between Avraham and Sarah, Avraham teaches us to be all-inclusive, and Sarah was the one who kept it in check and kept the navigation, kept the focus so that it could retain its value and retain its potency, which is why Avraham treasured Sarah so much. And we're going to see, it's very interesting how we learn it from this week's Sedra. Let's start off with the name of the Parshah. Popularity versus authenticity. There you go. That's the red rose. Is it a rose? No, red lily is this? I don't know what flower it is. Okay. But sometimes not blending in with everybody is the advantage. You've ever asked yourself the question, do you prefer to stand out or do you prefer to be part of the clan?
Very good question. Some people love to stand out so everybody can notice them. Now, other people will take a lot in and stay with the crowd, but they'll absorb everything.
I'm not going to ask you, Malcolm, to say which one do you like.
You see, it's an interesting one. I see it like being in our community. If I visit different shuls,
yes,
I see that, for example, certain shuls, it's traditional to, on a Friday night on Shabbos, to wear a suit and a white shirt.
Black and white.
And I know when I used to go with Gideon to wear a shirt, I said, no, I want to wear a shirt that I feel comfortable with.
How did your son appreciate that? You didn't mind?
No, I mean,
good.
Friday night, when I'm diving at the shrubs, quite often I won't wear a suit. I'll wear a nice pair of trousers and I'll wear a jumper because I want to chill out a bit. I want to relax.
You want to connect to Hashem in relaxed mode?
Well, I've got friends who are very secular and they say, no, we have to wear a suit. We're in a show on Friday night.
Wow. Malcolm, what do you do when you go to shul? Always a suit?
Sorry, say again.
When you go to shul on a Friday night.
I've not been to shul for Friday night since the pandemic started.
But before that, would you always wear a white shirt and a button-down shirt and a suit? No.
Yeah, I always wore a shirt and tie, which
and a tie.
I always wear for shul. I don't have any white shirts.
Okay.
I'm more colourful than that.
Oh, now we're talking.
Yeah, it's not necessary just to wear a white shirt.
Yes, black and white.
I only wear a suit or a nice sports jacket and tie.
Oh, beautiful.
And I used to go to the Shomrei Das on a Friday night, which is only across the road from where I live.
That's it.
That's the one I went to.
Oh, really? Yeah. The Shomrei. The Shomrei is very white shirt, no? But go on.
It's pretty good at the Shomrei because you get no talking and they get on with the service and everybody's friendly.
There you go. Well, it's really a shul, shouldn't really be talking.
Yeah.
That's what the Kiddush is for.
Yeah. But I will eventually I'm actually staying away from shul now till I've had my operation.
Please God, Bez Hashem,
I'm
good
not-
health.
Because they're keeping the doors open, and I've got to keep warm at the moment.
Yeah. Got to be gesund. You got to be gesund. 1 second. Standing out or being part of the clan, I think most people want to be part of the clan, but within the clan, stand out. And that's an interesting kind of paradox. We don't want to just be another cookie from the cookie cutter. We don't want to just be another, oh, you're just a number and a statistic. We have our own life, but we want that life to fit in and be accepted by the clan and the surroundings that we're in. But go on.
It's to do with your own personal persona of it. If you're insecure,
Yes.
with no disrespect, you will follow the crowd.
Yes.
If you feel quite confident and you are in respect with dressed or whatever you're doing within that community that's not disrespectful, outrightly disrespectful, and I think you should be able to,
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I know that I've been to Simchas
Yeah.
years ago where I'm looking, I think, how can their mothers were ever dressed like that? I think it's terrible. You can still look.
It's not from confidence. It doesn't come from confidence.
It's just like if you're in a secular function or a front one, you still have to dress in a respectful manner because there's people that you may just feel a bit.
100%. But I think a lot of it has to do with our confidence levels.
Yeah.
So when somebody feels very confident, they're more willing to push the bar because they believe they'll still be accepted by the clan.
Well, right.
So not sure they'll be accepted. Well, sorry, one more time.
I don't follow the crowd. I'm my own personality.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
but the crowd's with you anyhow, Malcolm.
Yeah, but I must admit, if you go to certain schools, for example, if I walked into the Babbage or went to Woodport Road, they were welcoming with open arms. If I go to certain schools in North Manchester, which I've done when I had to say Kaddish, because at the time reasons, it was, I had to have a friend of mine come with me
to be with you.
To chaperone. I said, I'm not going to that school on my own, because I feel uncomfortable.
Wow. Oh, so we know that we have to have a balance, and we also know that both elements are necessary. Both elements are necessary. On the one hand, we shouldn't think of ourselves as just a number. Oive, if we teach ourselves or our children that they don't really matter, they're just another number, it's not true and it's not good.
Of course not. You've got to be a name and a person. Yeah. A number is no good. It's like you go into a bank, for example, today, you're nothing but a number. But years and years ago, when we were youngsters, you go into a bank, it was Heather and you were addressed by your name.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just before we got I was in Brooklyn some years ago, in New York. My wife and I went, and we were there over the weekend. I went to a very posh school in
Manhattan.
Manhattan.
Go on.
Right, and I dressed casually, and then I just had some clothes on, and it was a very conservative school. Very conservative, very well to do. And the whole. This guy says, what's going on? He says, well, it's the show. It's the Manhattan. People are very, even some of the Kiddish. Nobody, how are you? Where are you from?
Goodness.
The fact is, it was a lovely Kiddish. That's why I stayed.
Oh, yeah. That's probably changed by now. How many years ago was this?
No, it's when we were about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, really? As recent as that? Okay. Yeah, for sure, it's supposed to be a warm place. And being able to be part of the crowd, I just want to say, Malcolm, for a man like you, it's a great example. Fantastic. Because you don't have to dress like everybody else to be part of everyone. You know that you can be you, and being yourself, you're still part of the Yiddish Kehillah, you're still part of the Manchester community, you're accepted, and that's very healthy confidence. But if it were to be a case where people would try to make someone, even if they're confident, feel like they're a reject or not part of the crowd, then that would be something that would be challenging to anybody. Nobody wants to feel left out or thrown out. But we're not talking so much from what we experience. We're talking the other way around. If we are creating the community, how do we want to conduct it in such a way that people become part of it but don't lead it the wrong way. So let's just say for a parent teaching their children, how much do we want to tell them this is the way it has to be done? And how much do we want them to be able to express their own individuality? Or we leave children aside if we're teaching a class, or if you're the rabbi of the community, or if you have a circle of influence amongst your friends. How many friends do you have to make sure are on the same page as you? And at what point can I say, no, this is something that even if they're not on the same page, even if it means that they won't talk to me as much, but this is something I'm not going to forego. And therefore, inclusiveness is not the most important thing in this area.
It's interesting you say that, because when I started to wear a yarmulke,
at work.
Not at work, I don't work for work. At home. And out with friends for a drink and stuff like that. I decided, I'm going to do it. And then one of the other friends, he worked for a Jewish company, so he started wearing it.
Wow.
But I'm saying that, and Malcolm knows it well enough that I speak my mind, very much so. And recently I was on a Zoom discussion with some friends, and I said, "You're putting this onto the WhatsApp group." I says, "I think it's offensive. I don't like it." I says, "Try and stop doing it." These various jokes. I mean, these are very good living guys, family guys. Straightforward, or but they're putting stuff on it. I went, "Look,
inappropriate."
Don't. You gotta do it, but don't put it on our group.
On a group.
I know one of my friends looks, we can see, what's going on here. And since I made that comment, Baruch Hashem, there's less WhatsApp coming through these silly little comments. If you're going to put something up about the community, which is quite important, please do. But don't put up this gas stuff. All right, I'm not. Listen, I've been around the world. I know I've had good life. I know, but there's certain things where I go, no,
that's too far.
That is
inappropriate.
If you want to do that, and your personal view, but not in the arena on WhatsApp. And I told everybody that.
I'm sure they appreciate it when you brought it up.
And the other guy, one of the guys who's like me, he yes, I do, but he was frightened to say anything. But I was, look, I know these guys now for over 30 years. I've been to our Simchas, I've been to that Simchas. But I thought, no, I'm not having this nonsense.
Amazing.
Well, that's within your own little private friendly group.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to be, inverted commas, a from guy. You could be in a non-Jewish environment and still
decent.
It. It's not
decency. Amazing.
Even political jokes, which I thought, no, keep them out of the way.
Yeah. I just want to go into the Parshah thing. We're going to have 5 minutes. We'll sum it up, and then we can do more discussion. The idea is the name of the Parshah. Chayei Sarah. What does Chayei Sarah mean? Help me out.
It's Chayei Sarah, the
life of Sarah. And of course, you'd imagine if the name of the Parshah is the life of Sarah, what's the Parshah going to talk about? Sarah's life. Well, guess what? She passes away in the first verse.
Yes, but you can still talk about Sarah.
Oh, so why would you call the name of the Parashah the life of Sarah? Of course, the answer is, as Jeff was saying, the life of her isn't only what she did while she was alive. The life of somebody is what they lived for. What did they stand for? What is her legacy that lives on far beyond the 120, 180 years that a person lives? The life of Sarah.
When you're reading about it, it's an example to show how things should be done.
Yeah, but in particular, the lesson that she teaches us, what she lived her life for, the values that she lived by, that live on past her passing.
Oh yeah, to this day.
Yeah. So what we expect to find in this week's Parshah, what's called the life of Sarah, isn't so much a description of what she did during her life. It's a description of what she lived for. So that way, even after she passes on, it's her legacy, and that's the life of Sarah. So it talks about the life of Sarah afterwards. Now, the problem is that if you read the Parshah, there are 3 main storylines in the Parshah. We're not going to actually read it, but we're going to put it on the screen. One big story is when she passed away, Avraham Avinu buries her. Okay, now burying Sarah in a way is closure. So it doesn't have to do with Sarah, but it's not about her life. Closure usually means that you move on, right? So how does that tie in to her legacy? Question number 1. The problem is that the next story is the story of Yitzchak moving on and getting married. And again, we read, as we said earlier, he finds comfort in the fact that here's the verses, and Rebecca lifted her eyes and saw Isaac, and she let herself down. And when she said to the servant, "Who is this man walking the field towards us?" The servant said, "He is my master." And she took the veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Here's the main one we're looking for. Isaac brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother. He took Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted for the loss of his mother. Is that Isaac's living the legacy of his mother? Or he's comforted, finding closure, almost moving on, which is healthy, but it doesn't emphasize the legacy of Sarah. It seems, again, the second big story of Isaac getting married, which is the bulk of the Parashah, isn't about Sarah's legacy. It seems to be that he's moving on and he's leaving it behind. So how does the name Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, fit? And then the last part of the Parashah is a third story where Avraham goes and remarries and takes a different wife instead of Sarah and has 6 other children with this other wife. It happens to be that this wife, as we said earlier, is Hagar, who was sent away. And this is our question. In fact, it seems to be all about moving away from her passing. How do we call this week's Parashah Chayei Sarah? And what we're going to do is revisit each one of those 3 stories and highlight how, although they seem like they're moving away, actually, once we know what Sarah lived for, what was her part of the process, then we'll be far more positioned to be able to understand. What's amazing, though, is just to emphasize that this last third story where Avraham remarries, he's remarrying the woman that Sarah asked him to send away. So he really married the competition. Not only is he marrying a different woman, he's actually marrying the woman who Avraham was married to before and sent her away on behalf of Sarah. That's just part of making the question a little stronger. It is the answer. The answer is going to be that to understand Sarah and Avraham's relationship is to understand what we discussed earlier, the balance between reaching out to every person and reaching out to certain people specifically. Is it gone? This is how we sent it away. This is the question. This is the question. If Chayei Sarah has nothing to do with the life of Sarah, what is it all about? What is the life of Sarah all about? What are we looking for? And this is the book full of question marks. This is the picture. Okay. So in order to answer this, we're going to explain Avraham and Sarah. Avraham Avinu was Mr. Kindness. We spoke about this last week. But also, Avraham Avinu was on a mission. What was his mission? To teach as many people about one God. Obviously, growing up in an environment full of paganism, everyone's bound down to idols, and there's a God for this, God for that, God for the other. There's thousands of gods, and everyone had their own little gods. And Avraham's coming around and teaching, actually, God means something else. God doesn't mean something you can understand. God doesn't mean something you can touch and see. God means the being that was before the entire universe. Anything you can see is part of creation. And creator can't be part of creation. Creator had to have created all of creation. So don't get your head rested. Stop thinking you're going to be able to find God inside creation, because any creation is a creation. Creator is beyond creation. And Avraham's teaching more and more people, and he's gaining a tremendous gathering. So much so we had in last week's parasha, 3 strangers show up in his house. He thinks them to be Arabs, and he brings them in. And what does he do to them? He serves them a meal, and before he goes, he expects them to start worshiping Hashem. It makes no difference who you are, where you're from, strangers and all. Avraham is the most inclusive kind of guy you can expect. But Sarah Imenu has a different approach. It's a beautiful Gemara, which we won't get carried away in, but the Gemara talks about Rabbanah. Rabbanah was one of the Mishnaic sages who made it his business to help Kohanim. Why do Kohanim need help? There are certain areas a Kohen can't go to. Where can a Kohen not go into? Into a Beis Chaim, into a cemetery, or go near a grave, because he becomes Tomei. And therefore the Kohen has to be careful not to come in close contact with a grave. What happens if you don't know where a grave is? So then you have to be careful not to go in the entire area, just in case you might be walking over a grave. Rabbanah made it his business to go around and locate graves, mark them out, and that way the Kohen could travel through that path as long as he went around the marked off area. And that's what he spent a lot of his time doing, traveling around. It's a tremendous service. You thinking of a story? Go on.
I've got a question, but I don't want to open a can of worms.
Okay, we'll get there in a moment, maybe afterwards, yeah? But the idea is that he came one time to Hebron, Cave of Machpelah. And while he's traveling, dealing with graves all the time, the Gemara records that he comes to the Cave of Machpelah and he wants to go inside the cave. And obviously Rabbanah is one of the Mishnaic sages. He's a very great man. And he sees with his spiritual eye, he sees the neshama of Eliezer. the servant of Avraham, guarding the cave. He doesn't let anyone in. And Avraham says, I want to go inside and I want to have a connection with Avraham's neshama. He says to Eliezer, what is Avraham what is Avraham doing here? Here we go. Rabbanah used to mark out caves where there were dead bodies. When he came to the cave of Abraham, he found Eliezer, servant of Avraham, standing at the entrance. He said to him, what is Abraham doing? He replied, he is sleeping, and Sarah is gazing at his head. He said, go and tell him Rabbanah is here. He's standing at the entrance. He said, Avraham, to let him enter. So he went in, he surveyed the cave and came out again. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, the Hasidic understanding of this seemingly random story in the Talmud, in the Gemara, that describes Avraham sleeping and Sarah gazing at his head. Says the Hasidic teacher, the Sitting Master of the Tzemach Tzedek, Reb Nachman Lubavitch, writes that when Sarah is gazing at the head of Avraham, there's tremendous message in that. What is on the person's head? There's actually a reference to another Gemara that talks about checking the hair of her husband. What are you checking her hair for? Why is she gazing at his head? Says the Tzemach Tzedek, she is weeding out any lice or dirt that might have got caught up in Avraham's hair. Why is it significant? It's metaphoric for when Avraham is fantastic, beautiful, great, enormous, little pieces of dirt get caught in it, which is metaphoric for bad elements that can draw energy from Avraham's kindness. And Sarah makes it her business to weed out the bad apples, to remove any dirt that gets caught up in Avraham's greatness. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, this is the Talmud telling us the story. If we understand it a little deeper, we're understanding that Sarah's job is to be the quality control, the filter that allows Avraham's goodness to be directed and focused rather than be spread in a way that doesn't accept it by all. And we actually find that Sarah's job was to limit the kindness of Avraham. That was all giving and all encompassing. Sarah narrowed it down. Where do we find that? We find that when she sends Hagar away. We find that when she sent Ishmael away. We find that when she insists that Yitzchak will be the only son that will continue the line Avraham was establishing. And in a sense, that was Sarah's gift to the future, where she retained the value, the potency of Avraham's message in a way that will be sustainable. It will be accepted, if not by everybody, because it can't go all across, but by narrowing it, it kept its potency to keep on going till today. Actually, we're going to revisit each one of these three stories and see how each one of the stories that seem to be unrelated to Sarah's life were all about what we just learned here. The Sarah element of what she lived for, not her personal comforts, but what she set her mission to do, which is to retain the uniqueness of Avraham's powerful message. And how did she do that? By limiting the scope, effectively losing some of the crowd. In order to keep the potency of the message alive, each one of these stories do exactly that. Let's do one by one. The first one, Avraham Avinu buys a cave to bury his wife. He's closing up. He's finding closure in the loss of his wife. Yet, if we look a little closer, we find that actually there's much more to the story. Which cave does he choose to bury his wife in? The cave of Machpelah. We know today that in the cave of Machpelah, the Rashi tells us already, it's brought down from the Talmud, that there's 4 couples buried in that cave. There's Avraham and Sarah, starting on this week's Parshah. Their son Yitzchak and his wife Rivka are also buried there. Their son Yaakov and his wife Leah are also buried there. Those are 3 couples. Who's the 4th couple? Adam and Eve. Adam and Chava lived years, 2,500 years before Avraham. So Avraham goes to find a place to bury his wife, and he looks for a place that's got tremendous importance. He finds the cave of where Adam and Eve are buried. So he takes that cave and he buys it, and he says, you know what? This cave is now mine. It will be for my family site. Think about it. Before he buys it, it's a universal cave. It's a universal shrine. It's a universal place of importance for every human being. because everybody's the descendant of Adam and Eve. But what does he do? He takes it and he says, you know what? From now on, it's going to be far more specific. It's not going to be universal. It's going to be my family's cave. And that's exactly what he does. So what he did is he took a Sarah life mission, which is to limit the scope of your reach in order to retain its potency. He takes the cave of Aaron and Eve and he makes it into the cave of Machpelah, a Yiddish or a Abrahamic cave and future. Why? Because that's how he's going to retain the light into the nations. We're going to be able to continue making a difference by remaining unique, exclusive, and all that brings. So although it looks like a story of where we're closing up with Sarah, we're not closing up. Avram is living by the message Sarah lived for, retaining uniqueness and limiting the scope. Same with the next story. Eliezer goes to find a wife for Abraham's son Yitzchak. It looks like closure. He's moving on. Fascinating. The entire story is mind-blowing. Eliezer is Avram's right-hand man. He's the most trusted individual. So much so Avram trusts him to find a wife for his son. And he says to him, don't just suggest someone. You can close the deal. That's how much I trust you, Eliezer. I know you'll find the right girl for my son. Yet, when Eliezer suggests his own daughter, the daughter of this trusted individual, no. Avraham says, unfortunately, no, I cannot take your daughter. I need someone who's going to be part of the family to marry my son. Because although everybody's special, close circle, our immediate circle has to have more value. We have to be kind to everybody, but family first. We have to be nice and respectful to every individual. But there are circles, and the closer we get, the more unique, exclusive it must be. And therefore, the marriage of Yitzchak, although it looks like he's moving on, but in what way is he moving on? Carrying on the values of his mother, Sarah, exclusive. Although everyone's important, he will not take a wife from anybody. He will only take a wife from somebody exclusively part of the family, even though it means traveling miles away through the desert and the rest, exclusivity. That's Sarah Imenu's message for life. We have to reach out to everyone, but there has to be a uniqueness and exclusivity for a closer knit circle. And that's the second part of the story. And guess what? The third story is the same thing. Avraham remarries. Who does he remarry? Keturah, Hagar herself. Yet, the same Parshah says to us, Avraham gave all that he possesses to Isaac, and to the sons of Abraham's concubines, Avraham gave gifts, and he sent them away from his son Isaac. While Avraham was still alive, he sent him away eastward to the land of east. Avraham gave all that he possessed to Isaac, and he withdrew his inheritance from all his other children, for that was Sarah's wish, and when she said, for the son of the maidens will not inherit. Sarah's wish was fulfilled, even not only Yishmael, all of the other 6 children that Avraham had, each one of them, Avraham sent away with tremendous gifts, looked after them, he would have loved them, and he would care for them, but exclusive, small circle as Sarah's wish. Furthermore, the Holy One, blessed be, agreed with her and said, whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, for in Isaac will be called your seed. And that's what we're learning this week's Parshah. Powerful. Her physical life, Sarah existed largely in potential. Because while she was alive, Avraham still had enormous amounts going on with a very, very wide crowd. But in this week's Parshah, we learn about the life of Sarah, where she slowly, what she lived for, her values, her life mission came out to fruition. Yitzchak was unique. His wife was unique. And the inheritance, the future of the Yiddish people, also unique. And we have to remember that. We have to talk to people, be inclusive of people, and we have to be respectful to everybody, to all creations of Hashem. But our local community, our Yiddishkeit, and certainly our family has to have an extra oomph. And we have to be proud of the fact that when we are strong at home, we are more positioned. We are better off in even being able to influence the outside because the exclusive circle is retained. And that's a value that Sarah lived for. And that's this week's Parshah, Parshah's Chayei. Powerful stuff. Not everything you do will be endearing to all. But those who know. We learned something today. Hashem should give us the koyach, do good things. Next week's Parshah, this holy land is your land. And next week, hopefully, we're going to make an extra special shir because it's Shabbos Mevarchim Sunday. I'm going to send around a few extra messages. And Be'ez Hashem, it should be a gebenchte Woche, a blessed week. It's a Mevarchim week, and it should be a week full of brachas. Thank you very much for joining, Malcolm. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Zachariah, sei gesund, and there should be good news.
Right, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Kol tov, sei gesund.
I hope to see you in person next week.
I hope so.